Hey developers, today I'm going to look at ChatGPT. Is it a better software developer than I am? How well does it write Vue code, and can you use this in your everyday life? Let's take a look and make sure you stay all the way to the end and you can find all those answers. Okay, so here is ChatGPT. So if you've been living under the rock for the last few months, everybody's been talking about it. It's been passed around on Twitter a bunch. But basically ChatGPT optimizes language models for dialogue. So they trained a model called ChatGPT, which interacts in conversational ways. So you can do a whole bunch of things with it. You can ask it a ton of different questions. What I want to focus on in this video is how well does it do in creating web apps, especially for things like Vue.js. So I've actually been talking to it, having some conversations with it, and I'm going to show you my results of how well you can use it. Is this a good supplement while you're creating your web apps, or is it not as useful? Let's take a look. So here is the main ChatGPT site. So after you create a free account, which you can, by the way, I'll put a link in the description if you want to test this out yourself, you are presented with this screen. It says right on the main screen that it may generate incorrect information. So I would not take all the information that you get out of ChatGPT as gospel, because it probably is wrong in some instances, and you'll notice during my tests, I did actually find that to be true. It actually may occasionally produce harmful instructions or biased content. So once again, there's kind of caveat emptor. It's a free service, but I can see if you're trying to use this for production, I would not use this for production. If you are a brand new software developer or you're trying to learn a new framework or language, I think there are some advantages, and I'll show you kind of what I found out. Definitely, this is not something you just want to copy and paste directly into your production code. It has limited knowledge of world and events after 2021. I noticed that in some things, especially programming related, it actually knew about it, and then some things it didn't. And that's actually going to be a little bit of a problem. So I've already created a number of chats before we actually got on here. And the reason I did that is because just typing out everything and letting it scroll, and it basically scrolls and tells you, it just takes a long time. So to speed up that process, I went ahead and created the chat. So I'm going to show you some of the questions I asked and to see how well ChatGPT especially creates Vue.js code, which, as many of you listen and watch my channel, I appreciate it, are huge Vue.js fans. I am too. So I thought that would be a natural place to start. So the first test for ChatGPT was how well could it create a Vue 3 app, especially one of the newer Vue 3 apps with composition API, script setup. So first I asked it, what is Vue.js script setup? It gave me information about like CDNs, a little bit about creating an app using the options API, but it actually didn't really quite understand what I was asking it. And what I've realized with playing around with ChatGPT the last few weeks is that you have to be very, very specific on what you're asking for. Otherwise, it just doesn't give you the right answers. And so it's like almost like talking to a 4 or 5-year-old, but the 4 or 5-year-old has a lot of information. You just have to be very specific. So I asked it what the latest version of Vue.js was, and even though it said that any data after 2021, it didn't have as much information on it, it actually did have information on when Vue.js 3.7.0 came out just a few days before this recording. So that made me very happy that it had information on that itself. And then I asked, how do you create Vue.js app with the command line interface? And it recommended using Vue CLI. If you've seen my last couple of videos, I recommend not to use Vue CLI because it's in maintenance mode, and there's some better tools out there to create Vue 2 and Vue 3 apps. So that was a little disappointing. I'm sure maybe if I would have been very, very specific in the command line and told it to create it a certain way, maybe it would have known how to generate those different type of apps. But for the purposes of this demo and this video, all the examples are going to use this Vue CLI. But certainly if you're following along, you can swap that out with whatever you want. Now I really wanted to see if there was a way I could tell it, if I was very, very specific, to tell it use Vue 3 with script setup. So I did that. I actually said, please create a Vue.js 3 app using the composition API with script setup. And it did give an example of doing this. You can see here it has the template tag at the top and script setup. It did still use this export default. It has the composition API with this setup function. This is sort of the old way of doing the composition API before script setup was allowed. So you can actually have, if you were going to refactor this, you can get rid of the export default. get rid of the setup function, move this all into the top of the underneath the script setup. You don't really need to have it as an object at all. Same thing with on mounted. You can import in. You could basically do this a much better way. You don't really need this setup function at all. You don't have to return the data. So you can see here that it like almost got it right, but not quite right. And that's kind of the theme I'm seeing while using ChatGPT, as someone that knows Vue pretty well. And I'm sure if you use this with React and other frameworks, you might see this. It's good, but it needs a little help. So if you're using this particularly just to learn Vue, I'd say you need to supplement this with other resources. So I went through a few other scenarios to see how well it did. The next thing I did is I asked it to create a to-do app using Vue.js. And once again, it used Vue CLI. And I probably should have said Vue 3, but you can see here it created this data object and it created this template. And I'll go ahead and copy and paste the code that it created. So if I just take this, I'm going to use the Vue CFC playground. You can see here, here's the to-do app that it created, and it doesn't look too bad. It has a learn Vue.js. It did add in a completed, so I think it like pulled some of this code from somewhere else, even though there's no way to like see if an item's completed or not. And then it does when you add you can push items on, but there's no way to like tell if it's completed or not. So it looks like it sort of did what you want to do. Once again, of course, using the options API, it might be just defaulting to Vue 2 specifically for most of these, although I believe that it probably would do very similar output for Vue 3. And then I tried to show it in a single file component. I noticed this a couple of times while I'm playing around with it. There's a million people using ChatGPT right now. So I was like frequently getting errors, frequently getting timeouts. So I guess it's just really, really popular. So if you're using this, I would caution you that right now there's a lot of people using it and you're probably going to run into errors. So the next thing I want to do is try to get it to create a landing page. So I asked it to do a landing page and it gave me this, which if I kind of put it into my editor here, so it made a red headline with welcome to my landing page. So really not that useful at all. I wasn't very impressed with that. I then asked it to add a hero image, and it sort of did the same thing. It adds in, if you can see here, I'll paste it. All it did was add in an image tag to the top, linking to a file that doesn't exist. So I don't think it really did what it's supposed to do, unfortunately. I then asked it to make it more fancy. And it's kind of funny. It did add in a bunch of CSS. So when I asked it to be a little bit more fancy, it added in some dimensions for the hero image. It added this fade enter and fade leave, which is not going to do anything because this is just a single file. But maybe if we were transitioning between different routes, it would like fade in or fade out. And really, just really basics. And this fade enter active and fade lead active, I am almost certain this is the exact same thing you see on the Vue documentation, official documentation. So it looks like it just kind of pulled it directly from there. And then it does give you a little information about the VIF. Yeah, like if we had a VIF, you can add the transition in, or if it was like kind of going between different components. Talks a little bit about vModel. And then I asked it one more question. I said to make it more fancy. See, that's what I just copy and pasted. And then I said the hero image should be from Unsplash. Also just show the code. And it didn't really understand me. It still kind of explained a bunch of things, even though I just wanted to show the code. And then it used Axios, which I guess is fine, but I'd probably use fetch because I don't know, it'd be easier. And so if we look at what it created now, I can kind of copy and paste it. It basically is the same code again. We go back to the playground, except this time it's grabbing this from Axios. So if I just comment that out, and it added an email. So one other thing it thought it should do was add in a little more interaction. So it added this email input, which I thought was just kind of useless. But looking at the code, I mean, It uses a V on. Once again, it didn't use the @ sign, so obviously if this was like this, which would do the same thing. So that's a little bit nitpicky. I mean, it's fine code. It just kind of added in the send email, which then if you click send email, it doesn't really do anything. So I think you could probably like talk through step by step to get it to do exactly what you want. But right so far, it just makes really very simple pages. Let me show you a little bit more of an advanced example. I asked it to create a form with name, age, date, and an input to enter multi-line text, include a submit button that submits a button to the backend application. Please only show the code. Now you could probably do this with like Copilot as well, but I wanted to see how well ChatGPT did it. And you know, it did it pretty well. I mean, if I come back here and I just copy and paste it in here, here it is. It didn't add any styling or anything, but it added in all the different labels, inputs. It's not very accessible. It didn't add in all the accessibility rules I would have liked it to be. Once again, it's just adding a V model to each. And once again, it's using the options API. And then it did add this Axios post at the end, because I said it if you want to talk to backend application. So then I asked it to add more CSS. And it added this CSS and even tells you like where to put it in the style tag. So if I come back down here and I add in the style tag, I just copy and paste it. You can see it looks a little nicer. So it was able to add in some nice formatting when I asked it to look nicer. You know, this is definitely subjective. People maybe say this is still pretty ugly, but it looks a little bit better than it did before. And I kind of played around with it a little bit more. And how do you put this all in a single file component? I'm going to show one thing. Right at the end, I asked it to add some unit tests. And it definitely did that. It used Jest and Mocha. And it's actually not a bad unit test. It's just like it uses Vue test utils, which is kind of the normal way you use Vue testing. And use this const wrapper. And then it just checks to see if it's been called or not. And then I try to say kind of the more modern way I think people are creating Vue tests. Not everyone, but like my company, when we do Vue tests, we use the testing library instead. And I've seen that a lot on the React side. First, I asked it to do it Vue testing library, and it didn't understand that, and it just did the same thing with Vue test utils. But once I asked it to use the testing library, it actually showed the example using testing library, which was pretty impressive. And from looking at this looks right. So you can render the form here. You can get labels by text. And if you don't know, testing library is another really common Vue library. Well, it's a library that works with React, Angular, and Vue, and it's more like as if you're the user. So instead of like putting in fake data, we're getting all the labels by text, and we're firing events as if someone's like typing in all these form inputs, and then we're checking to see once they click the submit button that it's actually going to the back end. So I think this is a little bit nicer, and I was really impressed that it could figure this out without any other prompting. And then I did ask at the end to make it more accessible, and it kind of errored out. But the first time it did it, it actually looked not bad. It added typeable text, it added an area described by, added some placeholders, even explained some things that you need to do to make it more accessible. So this is a great tool. Like if you are creating a form really quickly and you forgot some accessibility rules, ChatGPT might be worth just pulling up real quickly and saying, can you just remind me of the accessibility rules? You could probably get the same thing from Google, but it's cool how like you have all the information here. For some reason, it only got down to date and then it just kind of died. But I would say this for the Vue.js form, once we gave it enough specifics, this is really neat. I'd definitely give it like a 9 out of 10. Then I asked it like to do some code fixing, like, can you see this code? Can you fix it? And there's been a lot of examples of people doing this online. So I'm just going to try to do it with some Vue code. And I took the same example as this one, and I changed the submit form to 1, so the submit doesn't work. And I just asked, what's wrong with this code? Why won't it submit? And it didn't explicitly call it out, but it did mention one thing, is that check the submit form method is correctly defined and called in the template. So number 2, it did actually figure it out, but it said it wasn't exactly sure what was wrong with it. But this is kind of impressive. That was like a common mistake. I don't know if you would want to do this once again for production. You may not want to copy your production code into ChatGPT. I'm sure it's maybe even recording some of these answers and helping it with its modeling. So you obviously want to be really careful. But maybe if you had a really generic problem that you can just copy the code in here, this might not be a bad idea. Or if you're learning and you're completely stuck, it might not be a bad idea. Just copy and paste your code into ChatGPT and ask why it's not working. So this alone is really helpful. Once again, you might be able to do this with other tools. I don't know if Copilot would help you, but it's definitely cool that you can do this. And then we just had advent of Vue, which if you don't know, was like a 25 days of every day you get emailed a new kind of interesting problem and you're supposed to create an app using Vue. It actually ended early, I found out. But still, I went through one of the days, one of the first few days was, here's an example of how you could create an a Christmas joke generator using Vue.js. And it created one. It's just really, really simple. I'll show it to you. So if I kind of copy and paste it in here, you see, you just click a button and it just gives you one of the jokes in here. It looks like it's just doing a random method to do it. Yeah, so it works. I mean, once again, for maybe just learning Vue, this is great. Nothing too complicated. It's really hard to put like a complicated problem in here. I would say it would probably take you more time to just put in like a complicated problem than just to figure it out yourself sometimes. And the last challenge I put ChatGPT is a more of a Leet code type problem. And if you're looking to cheat on Leet code or get other answers for it, this seems to be a great way to do it. I asked him, I just copy and paste this directly from Leet code, and it gave me an answer. So it's like, here's a recursive solution that checks all possible paths. Now, I think this works. I haven't checked it, but I think this works. And then I asked it to do it again with like TypeScript and JavaScript, and it gave me like a typed version of it, which is really interesting. So I think Leet code questions, if you're first off, if you're studying for Leet code, I wouldn't use ChatGPT. This is going to give you answers, but whatever website you're going to should have the answers already. Obviously, I've heard people could use this like cheating on interviews, but I don't know. It's pretty obvious if you're typing in an answer to another window while you're trying to do an interview, and then you're just copying and pasting something. You wouldn't be able to answer any questions of where you came up with the thoughts of and how you came up with the answer. So it's probably not great for that, but maybe there is a problem that you've never seen before and you don't have readily available the answer. You could use ChatGPT to give you the answer. And I bet you could ask it some follow-up questions, like why did you do this? And it might give you some more information on it as well. So those are all the things. I don't know, I'd give this like a 10 out of 10. If you're just looking for Leet code questions and you want to get answers, they're great. You could probably even ask questions like, can you show me 5 Leet code questions in this category? And it would show it for you. I mean, there's so much information here. You know, overall, I'd say its Vue knowledge is okay. Definitely not the best. One thing I noticed real quickly is I try to use Amplify, which is a set of products I work on at AWS, and it was not very good at it. It showed really old code examples or some things that were downright wrong. Like I asked it to add in the authenticator, which is a component that I helped create with UI Vue, and it gave a really old version of it. And then I asked it to do it like a newer one with the newer version of Vue, which I did down here, Vue 3, and then it gave me an even older version of Amplify Authenticator, so this is obviously wrong. So it's like almost right, and I've heard that there's other ones it knows better, but it seemed like the examples we're giving me were like odd and they weren't quite right. So your mileage may vary on what information that you want to ask and if it'll be correct or not. It'd almost be like you definitely want to double check anything that ChatGPT gives you for accuracy, because it may not be right at all. So overall, I would say for a learning tool for Vue, I'd say this is like a solid 8 or 9 out of 10. For like experienced Vue developer that wants to use ChatGPT to help them with their workflows, I'd probably give it a lot less. I don't know, 6 out of 10. You might even be just better off using something like GitHub Copilot to help you generate small pieces of functions. But for an experienced Vue developer, I haven't seen it like give really good advanced Vue examples. I mean, maybe like if you've never used a certain testing library, like I saw with testing library, it actually generated some code there. That's helpful. But I don't think I'll be using this in my day-to-day work. But if I'm learning a language, I'd definitely be using it. So let me know if you agree or disagree. Leave a comment below in the comments. Thanks.